We're here to talk about St. Ignatius' spiritual exercises, but it would be remiss of me if I didn't go through a short bio of this great, great saint. So let's meet Inigo de Loyola. He was born in the Basque country of northern Spain in 1491 to a moderately wealthy family. They called them minor nobility. He was the youngest of 13 children, and his mother died soon after giving birth to him. Notice the date, 1491. I think we all remember from our elementary school days what happened in 1492. Yes, Columbus sailed, and it was a very exciting time. It was a risk-taking time. It was a time of adventure, and especially in that part of the world, Portugal and Spain. Ignatius grew to be a brave soldier, and he was quite the ladies' man. He was frequently seen at court, and he really developed a taste for the material world. This happened all through his teens and throughout his 20s. He eventually became an officer in the Spanish army, but on May 20th, 1521, at the age of 30, Ignatius had what is commonly referred to as his cannonball moment. Literally, it was a cannonball. At the Battle of Pamplona, when the Spanish army was fighting the French army, a cannonball struck him, wounding one leg and breaking the other. He was injured very badly and was taken back to the family's castle in order to recuperate. The healing was not easy and was quite painful. Ignatius wanted to look good, so he was thinking, how are my legs going to look when I go back to court and go back to my normal life? So, not liking the way one of the legs looked, he told them to re-break it and set it again, which only caused him more pain and almost cost him his life through infection. Ignatius would walk with a limp the rest of his life. With no TV, no Netflix, no cell phones, Ignatius's days of recovery were long and frankly quite boring. He begged for books on knighthood and court life, and they couldn't find any books in the castle, only two. One on the life of Jesus Christ, and the other on the lives of the saints. So Ignatius grudgingly took the books and started to read. He became more and more intrigued with the life of Christ and the lives of the saints. He really gravitated to St. Francis and St. Dominic. And he began imagining himself in their stories. And he thought, well, gee, if they could do this, I could do this. And Ignatius slowly was really experiencing a conversion. While thinking about his life as a soldier and a part of court, those feelings ultimately left him really desolate and without life. However, when he started thinking about himself as a saint, or modeling his life after a saint, he felt joy and satisfaction and consolation. Ignatius didn't know it at the time, but these thoughts and feelings, consolation, desolation, and imaginative prayer, would become the groundwork of the spiritual exercises. With newfound zeal and purpose, and wanting to walk where Jesus actually walked, Ignatius desired to go on pilgrimage to the Holy Land. As he headed out, he visited the Benedictine monastery at Montserrat. He gave away all his fine clothes to the poor, and he confessed his sins. Before a shrine to Mary, Ignatius laid down his sword and his dagger, thus literally and figuratively renouncing his former life and starting a new one. Ignatius then headed to the small town of Manresa in Spain and wound up staying there for over a year. He became a beggar and stayed in a small cave-like structure. He prayed fervently, and he even worked at a local hospice center. The person Ignatius was at this point was light years away from the courtly ladies' man of old. He was unkempt. He was thin. He engaged in a variety of bodily penances. His fingernails were overgrown. His toenails were overgrown. He was really unsightly. His hair was a matted mess. His only thoughts were of God and trying to be like a saint, or what he thought was a saint, pious and holy. But all this time, God was working on him. And it was during this time that the spiritual exercises were really beginning to take shape. It was also here at Manresa, in this cave-like structure, that he had one of his first mystical visions. It was an enlightenment that allowed him to see the world with new eyes and find God in all things. He later said that this mystical vision is a place where he learned about God as in no other time in his life. And he began to discern that God didn't want him to do all these pious acts. He wasn't asking for that. He wasn't a tyrant, but he was more a loving and generous God who wanted Ignatius to have an abundant, full life. Ignatius finally did get to Jerusalem, but he only stayed a few days because when he arrived, the people there said, "Go home. You're not wanted here. Who are you?" He had no credentials. And two, there was unrest in the Holy Land. Unrest in the Holy Land. It follows us to this day. So what to do? He comes back and he figures, well, I don't have any credentials. I should start studying for the priesthood. And he was pivoting, he was adapting to his new reality, being flexible. So he started studying, and he found a little place that was teaching Latin to school children, and he joined. Even as an adult, he was joining to start learning Latin. He wound up getting thrown in prison at this point by people from the Inquisition because he was starting to teach his spiritual exercises, and they said, "Who are you? You're not a priest. You have no authority." So he thought, I guess I have to become a priest. So he went to the University of Paris, and these were his roommates at the University of Paris. A pretty wonderful bunch, if you ask me. Francis Xavier and Peter Faber were his roommates. And there at the University of Paris, he started studying in earnest Latin and literature, philosophy and theology. And Ignatius began to teach them the spiritual exercises. This small band of men began to grow, and they professed vows of poverty and obedience, and they vowed to travel to the Holy Land one day after becoming priests. They traveled to Venice, and Ignatius and this small group of men were ordained in 1537. Again, these friends of the Lord are unable to travel to the Holy Land, so they set out for Rome, pivoting again, being flexible to God's call and action in their lives. It is there, in Rome, that Ignatius takes up residence, saying his first Mass on Christmas morning in 1538. For those of you who have been to Rome, St. Mary Major is one of the 4 papal basilicas there, and that's where he said his first Mass. He also taught there, preached, and performed works of mercy. It is there in Rome that this band of friends discerns that they're being called to something else. They're being called to create a new religious order, the Company or Society of Jesus, which was formally constituted in 1540 by Pope Paul III. Just an aside, recently I read that Pope Paul III told Ignatius, "Let Rome be your Jerusalem." He'd always wanted to go there, he wanted to live there, and Pope Paul III says, "Let Rome be your Jerusalem. This is where you belong." It is there in Rome that Ignatius stays and writes the constitution for this new order, the Jesuits. He also completes the spiritual exercises. And he sends thousands of letters, of course handwritten, no emails then, of instruction and encouragement to people. Ignatius suffered in his end days of horrible stomach ailments. And it is there in Rome where he dies on July 31st, 1556, at the young age of 65. But at the time of his death, there were more than 1,000 Jesuit priests. Inigo had become a different person. He had been transformed from the chivalrous, dashing soldier and had realized his true self by the grace of God. Ignatius was canonized by Pope Gregory XV in 1622.